What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to Curated. My name is Steven. Behind me is three of the best cars that Ferrari has ever made: the 288 GTO, the F40, and the legendary F50. Let's jump into some of these cars, what makes them special, and these specific examples. Starting off, this is the 288 GTO. This is Ferrari's first kind of supercar lineage. This is the car that Ferrari built designed to go racing. That's what GTO means, Gran Turismo Omologato. This car was built at the heyday of Group B racing, and that's what it was designed for. This is also the rarest of these halo cars, with only 272 produced. This makes it one of the rarest cars that Ferrari's ever built. So continuing the history of Ferrari, they always talk about how the road cars were secondary to the race cars. This car is kind of proof of that, where this car, they had to build it in order to race it. Unfortunately, as we all know, it was canceled before this car could live up to its potential. Now, going to the development of the F40, this car was the last car that Enzo personally signed off on. There was complaints from customers that their cars were getting too cushy, too soft, not enough driver focused. Well, this was their answer. As an evolution of the 288, they were originally planning on only building 400 of these cars, but they ended up producing around 1,300 cars total for the world. These cars are as special as everyone says they are. Anytime you get to spend time with one of these cars, they truly live up to it. When you look at these cars compared to the 288, the F50, you can see design language and evolution of these cars throughout. Moving on to the legendary, the F50, 349 cars produced, mid-engine, available in open top and coupe configurations, 6-speed manual, V12, inboard pushrod suspension, carbon tub. This car was truly Formula One technology at the time, homologated for the street. When you take a look at both of these cars, the F40 and the F50, there is subtle design language that carries over: the shape of the front grille, the vents, and the thin black body line that carries throughout. And obviously the big body work, but you can see the evolution that they were going for to continue the lineage of this legendary supercar series. This car was probably the most extreme car that they built for the street at the time. And this is kind of the direction that the brand was going, really getting you connected to the race car lineage and what was going on at the time of motorsports. They were running NA V12s in the Formula One era. Today they're doing turbocharged 6-cylinders, and we've seen that continue on even all the way through to the F80 and the new hypercar series. Talking about the back of these cars, this is where the business end of these cars are. So dramatic, so many vents, just great angles and lines to look at. Looking back here, this is that famous curved back glass that was taken directly from the Dino. And then if you look, continuing on at the F40, that rear glass in the firewall has that gorgeous curve. We can take a look under the hood and see all the modifications that they did and the extensive work to make this car truly the Group B monster that it is today. So first off, in order to race this car and get packaging for the turbos, the chassis, the engine is moved very far forward, and it was fitted with a transaxle gearbox that hangs over the back for much better weight distribution and handling that makes this car so iconic. Now, if we go over to the F40, this is the car that you can truly see where they let the engineers do their thing. Even though they work with the constraints of the original car, lots has been improved upon while working with the original packaging. You can see some of the similarities with the chassis, however, much more extensive use of bracing when it comes into here. Carbon fiber was used also throughout the chassis on this, but all this amazing ducting and packaging to move and manage airflow throughout the car was all very purposeful. Famously, when you're looking at F40s, you can see where the overspray is when they were building it. And it varies a little bit car to car based on country of origin and year in production sequence. But there's certain places where you want to see that overspray, and there's certain places where you don't. And that's one of the things where finding a good, honest car is very, very, very difficult and takes people that have seen the cars with enough regularity and the variations to discern good from bad. now we are at the business end of the F50. This is what makes this car so spectacular, is that engine, the gearbox, and the suspension setup. This was truly Formula One technology, bleeding edge at the time, everything they had thrown at this car. So starting from the back, moving forward, when you look at how much space there actually is in the rear of the engine bay, a lot of this was designed this way for packaging. They built it around the tires, managed the airflow for cooling, and then building the gearbox and everything around that. Another cool detail, if you look, the gearbox and the suspension is all one unit. So it's called a stressed member, where the engine and the gearbox are actually bolted to the chassis and everything hangs off of this. This creates a very rigid platform and allows the chassis not to flex in undesirable ways, where only the parts that are supposed to move are the ones that are moving at the time. So this is one of the biggest generational jumps for the Ferrari supercar lineage and honestly road cars. This is the secret to the F50. This is the carbon tub where you can see this is what the whole car, the whole main structure and frame, if you will, is based off of. This is what made the car so strong, so light, so stiff, and honestly so safe. But this is also what allows the car to be the two option car, where you can have it as the coupe or the spider. Because of the rigidity that this provides, it allows the car not to need additional bracing when you take the roof off. So this was one of the secrets to making this car so legendary and paved the way for so many iconic cars. So let's talk about some of the differences behind the wheel of each of these three cars. Although they're the Ferrari supercars, they could not be more different if they tried. So starting off with the 288, you can see some of the visual differences to the F40. First thing you can immediately see is how much higher the ride height is and the suspension travel. So this was very much in the original spirit of this car being a Group B homologation race car, being their off-road, their gravel, their tarmac, and you can feel that even on the street. As the turbos kick in, you can feel that suspension kind of squat and lean back a little bit. The other thing that this car has going for it is the early, smaller Michelin tires. So it's a much narrower wheel and tire package. That makes it a little bit lighter on its feet, but when those turbos kick in, those rears can get away from you, so you do have to be careful with that. The steering is also very similar more to the 308. So you get that kind of that little bit older, direct manual, non-assisted steering feel. Moving on to the F40, the biggest thing that you can see, dramatically lower car and a much improved wheel and tire package. That's very apparent from the second that you get in this car, that you're in a more speed-focused car. The other thing that you can see is the full body aerodynamics that were added to the car, where it's much better at managing the airflow, especially at speed. You can feel that rear wing working. The much bigger wheel and tire with the updated Pirelli tires makes this car a lot more comfortable on the road at speed, where this car is a little bit more lively and a little bit more engaging, but this car is definitely planted. Moving on to the F50, surprisingly enough, at low speeds and operationally, this car is a much more usable car. Although it looks intimidating because it's bigger and more dramatic, the operational controls, mostly the clutch and the gearbox and the steering is a lot easier to manage than these cars. On the F40 and the 288, it is a very, very, very short clutch travel. This car is much easier at low speeds, but where it matters, this car feels more significant. That's the only way I can describe it. You can feel everything working. It's much stiffer, it's much more planted, much more direct, where this car gives you much more emotion. This is a higher level, if that makes sense.
We weren't in the back rooms in the 70s and 80s in Ferrari, but one has to think that when these cars were thought about and created, as with everything Ferrari, it wasn't so much about, well, let's create a special collectible car, but more so, let's go racing. And that's really where the 288 starts. And I think initially when the car was received by the market, it was received as, an enthusiast car, something that we can go drive. And we saw a lot of cars, and we see them in the market now with, miles on them, which is great. They were enjoyed and they were driven. And now we're starting to see people view them really more as kind of the anchor for their blue chip collections. When we move into the F40 now, that again, very driver focused car, kind of like this hybrid-y feeling race car, street car. And then you started to see a little bit more interest in the fact that, well, now this is a second special edition car. And again, more investment-minded guys started looking at those cars in period. And then you get to the F50. From a design aspect, the F50 is a huge departure from really the design styling of Ferrari, but also they end up taking some real chances and introducing some Formula One technology, and then really start to pay attention to the collectability and making them more limited. So you have 349 cars, only 55 of them which make them to the US as US spec cars. I mean, now there's a lot more that the cars are exempt and they could all come in. But you start to see this trend towards, well, now these are going to be every 5 or 10 years or so, we're going to do this really special drop. And they are usually departures from traditional design language. They're usually a little forward-looking technology-wise. And every car kind of goes through its little kind of design ideation, and some of it will filter into the next cars. But what we start to see is this assembly of what I call the jewels in the crown, right, of the collectible Ferraris. And what was really interesting, and what always interests me, is I'm an enthusiast first, but I've really paid attention as to someone who buys and sells these cars, is where's the market trend going, and what are people focusing on? And now that we have buyers that are pure enthusiasts, pure drivers, and then you have like really finance-minded guys that are kind of car guys, but they're really like, they're looking at these cars and how they affect their balance sheet. Then we fill in with guys that are like kind of a hybrid of all of those things. That's what's really driven the market forward. So interestingly enough, if you look at the 10-year market for like the 288, the F40 and the F50, which is the focus on this video, you see this really nice kind of solid curve of about 15% annually increase on the car, right? It started off a little bit less. If you look like 2015 to 18, it worked about 7%, and then it really supercharges. But what's really interesting is if you look at the last 3 years, you see this incredible, almost like rocket fuel growth on these cars. I mean, the F50, and obviously we had a couple of incredible results this year, which kind of supercharged those numbers. It's like 77% in the last 3 years. The F40 is something like 37%. And then the 288 GTO, based on a couple of the last transactions, is also like at 40 to 50% in the last 3 years. Those are incredible numbers by any measure if you look at hard asset investing, be it real estate, be it stocks, be it, well, let's say crypto, but those are pretty volatile. You don't get a lot of pushback on these cars. So I think what we're seeing is we're seeing this aggregation of buyers begin to focus on these cars in particular. And then if you start to look forward a little bit to, say, the LaFerrari, and then we move into now the F80, a little more controversial, now you're starting to see limited numbers push almost 1,000 units. Granted, you have more buyers, so demand levels might be the same, maybe even more. But I think you're beginning to see an era of change in the investment market where I think the companies are more inclined to fill the need, to fill the demand, than they were back in the day when they were just making cars to go racing with, for instance. Or they really wanted to kind of make a special, very limited amount of cars for their very exclusive clients. I don't know what that does to the investment market in the next 5 years on the newer cars. I think the F80 is going to be kind of a good litmus test for that. There's more cars. The base price is much higher. So I don't know if the percentage gain will be the same. I mean, at $4.5 to $5 million, if it were to follow the other cars, that would make it an $8 million car in the second market. I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball with that. I think that's going to be a very telling to see how that goes. But that brings us back to kind of the initial cars, and I think why I feel that market continues to go up, why that market's going to do incredibly well. We ourselves have transacted quite a few of these in the last couple of years, and really what we're seeing is as we're going into the market and trying to find these cars, it's harder to find kind of a really unmolested, what we consider blue chip, lower mileage car, because so many of them have transacted into the market. As we start to look back on these cars, I'm really bullish on where I think the market's going to go in the next 5 years. I don't like to make guarantees, but I think we're really close to a $10 million number on F50s. And I think 288's right behind that, also $10 million. I know we sold a 99-mile example a couple of years ago. And while that's a very unique example, I know that there's already been serious offers on that car for over $10 million. So if you're looking at where the market's going versus where that market's come from, I think we're really bullish on what's going to happen with kind of the crown jewel sequence that we just talked about.
As three of Maranello's greats, these cars have been talked about endlessly, but sharing these cars with all of you guys is what we enjoy to do. Thank you guys for all of your support. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.